want to talk about is risk, which is obviously not that different from failure. And I'm not talking about the board game. I am talking about the stepping out. We have a large graduating class in December, and risk is a paralyzing concept, right? So I want you to think with me back to the words of classic wisdom text on this very topic. It's Ecclesiastes, and you're probably familiar with it, or at least part of it. It's Ecclesiastes 11. It says this, cast your bread on the surface of the waters, for you will find it after many days. Divide your portion to 7 or even to 8, because you don't know what misfortune may occur on the earth. If the clouds are full, they pour out rain on the earth. If a tree falls toward the south or north, wherever the tree falls, there it lies. But the one who watches the wind will not sow. He will look at the clouds and not reap. Because just as you do not know the path of the wind or how bones are formed in the womb of a pregnant woman, you do not know the activity of God who makes all things. Sow your seed in the morning. Don't be idle in the evening, because you don't know whether it is morning or evening sowing that will succeed, or whether both of them alike will be good. I hope that you are hearing the rhythm of ignorance in this text with me. Over and over again, the writer reminds us of what is most true about us. You do not know. And it is that not knowing that is terrifying to us, is paralyzing to us. And we work as hard as we can, even though we know somewhere at the center of our being, we work as hard as we can to try and prove him wrong. I think if I just get all my ducks in a row, I will know the outcome of any given decision. I think if I just plan it really wisely and well, if I just work the systems of control, if I just plan it well enough, if I just study it, if I just strike at the right moment, if I just do the right thing, then I can guarantee outcomes. Does that sound like anybody? It's the perfectionist, it's the control structures, it's the ones that are, I'm afraid of failure, I'm afraid of pain, I'm afraid of disappointment. And the outcome is, we let ourselves be paralyzed by the fact that we don't know. Rather than celebrate and accommodate our ignorance, we deny it. Right? And we deny it in a number of ways. So here's this ancient writer who's speaking to us in the agricultural metaphor that would have communicated clearly to that culture, less so to us because we're not aware of the backstory. He says, cast your bread on the waters because you will find it after many days. Divide your seed among 7 or 8 fields because you don't know what misfortune is going to occur. What is he saying to us? Well, let's back into this a little bit by taking it down a little bit. He says, the one who watches, look, here's verse 3. If the clouds are full, it's probably going to rain. What can you do about that? That's what I thought. So, if a tree falls, north or south, guess where it lies? North or south. It's one of those Homer Simpson moments. Well, duh, right? What's he saying? By studying the clouds, do you think you're going to make it rain? By attempting to predict which way the tree is going to fall, do you think you can affect the outcome? And then he comes to this conclusion. The guy who watches the wind, who looks for exactly the right moment to sow his seed, the guy who's studying the weather patterns, who's tuned into the Weather Channel, who's got GPS and a stopwatch on his tractor as he prepares to sow the seed, studying the wind doesn't sow seed. Trying to predict what the outcomes are likely to be results in a paralysis of analysis. You get stuck in trying to mitigate failure by predicting the future by watching what's happening around you. Do you see what he's getting at there? If the one who watches the wind doesn't sow, the one who looks at the clouds, studying them, yeah, there could be rain, doesn't reap. Why? Because she's spending all her time trying to mitigate failure, trying to minimize inevitable risk, trying to, as much as possible, undermine the reality of her own ignorance. And the writer of Ecclesiastes said, let's be clear. And he bangs this drum at least 4 times loudly. You don't know. You don't know. You don't know. You don't know. We ought to be impressed by our ignorance. Does that make sense? Because when we are, then we can pay attention to what he actually says is the wiser course of action. If you're trying to predict exactly the right outcome, there's a very good chance that no outcome will be available to you because you're going to be spending most of your time trying to predict the exact right outcome. You sit in a room imagining what the conversation with this friend is going to be like, imagining what the conversation, and then you have the whole thing in your head, and the fact is, having it in your head doesn't actually make it happen in real life. Then you sit down at Starbucks, and the conversation doesn't, so we have to back up and rewind the whole thing, and, we do, or if you're like me at all, you spend a whole lot of time worrying in God's presence. I call it prayer. But what it really is just worrying in God's presence. It's not the same thing as prayer. Or what we do, if you're at all like me, is you think of all of the possible disastrous solutions or outcomes that could occur. Am I connecting with that? Does anybody know what I'm talking about? It's like, well, this could happen and this, and then you worry as if every one of those things is actually going to happen. When in fact, only one of them could happen. But we worry as if all 8 of them will happen. And if you're like me at all, I'm kind of pessimistic, and I think of myself as a realist. But reality, I'm a pessimist. If the jelly is going to land, right? If you strap it to the back of the cat, you seen that? I love that GI. Anyway, sorry. So we do that. That's how life is going to work, right? And the guy in Ecclesiastes is saying, look, guys, trust me on this. All of your thinking, all of your how many of you have sat with a list, pros and cons? Just done it. You proed and conned yourself to death. Because the answer is going to magically appear out of the list. No, it isn't. It isn't going to happen. You know why? Because you're going to load the list. You're smart. How many of you have done a psych exam or a test or a personality inventory half a dozen times? You know how to answer the question so that you get the outcome you're looking for. Hello? And so we become impressed with our ability to spin the game. Not impressed nearly enough with our ignorance. Not impressed nearly enough with the fact that we can't outcome control. If the tree's going to fall, it's going to fall. Where it lies, there it lies. It's an inevitability. If clouds got rain in them, it's probably going to rain. Hello? Right? So what do? If analysis paralyzes, if worry gets us stuck, what are we to do? And so he comes right out the chute and says, look, what you do is you cast your bread on the waters. Because you don't know. A few days you might receive it back. What does this mean? Pardon this boring part. Well, I'm assuming the rest of it hasn't been boring, but this part will really be boring. In an ancient Near Eastern culture without modern agricultural methods such as irrigation, you relied on rainfall, but then you also, in the early springtime, relied on the flooding of the rivers that would flood the bottomlands and deposit silt on the lowlands, right? What we would think of as the wetlands relative to our ocean. Rivers in ancient times would overflow their banks and deposit silt and rich soil on the sides, and then as the spring went on, that water would retreat off the lowlands, and then you would sow your seed on the silt, on the wetlands that remained, right? And the moisture that remained in it would then start the germination process, and the seeds would come to fruition. Here's the problem. If you sow your seed too late on that land, what happens to it? It dries up. No germination. No seed sown. If you sow it too soon on that retreating river, what happens? It floats away with the water. Do you see? So what is he saying to us? Cast your bread on the waters. Cast your bread. Oh, you do know that bread comes from grain, right? And that if you kept that grain instead of sowing it, you could grind it into flour and make bread for your family. But you've reserved this little packet of grain for next year's harvest. You've ground into flour all of the grain from last year, and all you've got left after you've fed your family all year on last year's harvest, all you've got left is the seed grain, and your kids are starting to feel the pull of a delayed harvest. They're starting to, is there going to be grain again? Is there going to be bread again? So you hold in your hands what you could grind up and make flour to feed your kids, a sure and certain meal for your children. Or you could take your children's bread in the form of seed and cast it on the waters as it retreats. It's a risk. It's a risk. And trying to minimize it by figuring out whether it's going to rain or how the wind's going to blow and dry up. Yeah, you're not that smart, guys. You're just not that smart to know what 2 years will hold, let alone 5 or 10. So what does he say? Take a risk. Throw your bread on the waters. It'll come back. Now here's how you minimize the risk. Because he doesn't want us to risk foolishly. Do you see what he's saying? Risk wisely. How do you do that? By diversifying the sowing of your seed. Sow in 7 fields. No, sow in 8, because you don't know. One of them might flood out, but the other one might be productive. Maybe 1 or 2 of them will be productive, and 3 or 4 will flood. But at least you got something going. Do you see? You minimize the risk, but you have to take it. You can't get the one right answer and hope that's the way you thread the needle of your life. You got to take a risk. Because the truth is, whatever happens will happen. There's nothing much you can do about it. Here's what you know. If you don't sow, you don't reap. If you don't risk, if you don't put your life out there, if you don't take a chance, if you don't make that phone call, if you don't apply for that job, if you don't make that connection, if you don't move to that place, you're going to be perfectly safe and starve to death. Because the riskless life is the shrinking life. You want a tiny life? Then avoid risk. You've heard this. You know this, right? If you don't want to be hurt, never fall in love. It's another variation on the theme. Do you see? And the guy's saying, look, no. Risk is built into the fabric of being who you are. You are created to be the image of God. Guess what that means? That means that like your heavenly Father, you risk. I mean, look around you. What do you see sitting next to you? Don't you see the risk of the Father in embracing what potentially might not turn out so good? But potentially might. You don't know. You don't know. And by trying to ameliorate pain, by trying to limit failure, we end up crushing the life out of our life. So he says, sow your seed. Diversify. Get up early in the morning. Work as hard as you can all day. Sow your seed in the evening, because you don't know. Is it morning sowing or evening sowing? You can sit them, you see them sitting around the Starbucks, arguing about whether it's seed sown in the morning that has a better chance of production or seed sown in the evening that has a better chance. No. He says, you don't know. You're not that smart. Sow. Get to work. Come on. Work it hard. Now, don't think that the work you do will be the actual result you produce. Just know that you've got a good Father who knows how to make stuff and care for his children. If you don't do the work, though, there won't be an outcome. Now, the outcome might not be related to the work you do, because some of you have already experienced this. You put job apps in 83 places, and not one of them calls you back. And 84, who you didn't even put a job app in, he's the guy that calls you up. You look for apartments. You look for, all kinds of stuff, right? And I can tell you this story from my life. All of the things, so many things have come in from the sidelines. But I'm convinced that if I hadn't done the legwork that didn't produce any outcomes, I wouldn't have had the random answer that did produce the outcome. Do you see what I mean? Because he cares about how much you care. So get to work, right? Sow the seed. Do the work. Because if you don't sow, you don't reap. Now, it might not be that seed that you reap. It might be something, but that's okay. That's none of your business, because you don't know how the Father might bless your life. You don't know. If we could go back to the future and look back on this moment 5 years from now, at the decisions you make coming out of this chapel, not as a result of this, but the career you choose, the relationships you build in the next 6 months, the jobs you apply for, the churches you go serve, whatever it is. If we were to come out 5 or 10 years from and look back, you would never be able to predict how you got to there 5 years from now from where you started here. Anybody who's been around on the planet for any length of time will tell you they can describe with some degree of accuracy where they are. They cannot tell you for the life of them how they got there. Life is what happens when you were planning something else. That's this. If you're risk averse, just go back to bed and pull the blanket over your head. Your life will be really, really safe and really, really tiny. You're not built for that, but knock yourself out. But if you want to live, if you want to flourish as the image of God in which you were created to be, you've got to run the risk of both failure and success, neither of which you are able in the moment to define. Let's pray. Lord, I pray that you would help us to realize that we will be sufficient, adequate by your grace for our lives, regardless of what happens. Amen. Bless you guys.
At Vanguard University, your story matters. Where will it take you next? For more information, please visit vanguard.edu.